Well, it looks like the uncertain run-up to next generation is continuing here. Now with Bloomberg putting out another piece around the PlayStation 5 and its production leading up to its eventual holiday 2020 release. They keep saying this, and a lot of people don't really believe it, but I do think one way or the other, Sony's going to put out a system and Microsoft is going to put out a system. Will they be easy to find, and will there be enough for demand? That's kind of what the Bloomberg article is tackling today. Now, this is from Takashi Machizuki, who has covered the PlayStation 5 in production before, specifically around component shortages and Sony trying to put this thing together within a reasonable budget of $450 or less. Looks like it might actually be a bit more expensive now, though, after more reports have come out. But I do question some of the pricing around this and where that is coming from. We'll talk a bit about that one there. But actually, at this time, the channel here has now crossed 410,000 subscribers. And I'm looking at this and I'm saying, let's see if we can hit 500,000, 500,000 subscribers by the end of this year. And if we do, whenever we hit that number, we'll look into giving away a system like a PS5 or a Series X or a Switch or whatever the person wants who wins. So if you're new, make sure you subscribe down below. Oh, and make sure you like the video as well if you enjoy it. So let's jump over here. The article is called Sony Plans Limited PlayStation 5 Output in the First Year. I'll have it linked down below if you wanted to look through it yourself. And what's interesting about this article is the first thing they really start with here immediately. Sony Corp plans to produce far fewer units of its upcoming PlayStation 5 in its first year than it had for previous generation consoles launch. That is, of course, the PlayStation 4. Now, they say the PlayStation 4 had sold 7.5 million units in its first 2 quarters. Now, of course, Sony's quarter, their fiscal year overall, so the fourth quarter, ends in March. So it's very similar to Nintendo's. They pretty much run right alongside of that. And what's interesting about that is 7.5 million units is quite a bit, considering they had half of November, December, January, February, and March. Now they of course launched next to a stumbling Xbox One system, and they were at a good price at $400 in 2013, and they took off during that holiday season and never looked back. But there might be a bit of a problem here with the PlayStation 5 compared to the PlayStation 4 when it comes to availability and pricing. The biggest thing, I think, and most people understand at this point, is that pricing around your product is very, very important. And if we look here to the article, they mentioned that the PS5's loftier price tag may also deter initial take-up. Game developers who've been creating titles for the next PlayStation anticipate its price to be in the region of $499 to $549. So my one concern about this, yes, they had covered previously that Sony was having a hard time sourcing all of the parts they need at a reasonable price. They can, of course, overpay for the parts to get them, whether they're outbidding other companies around them. We've had cell phone manufacturers, for example, named as companies that have pulled parts away from Nintendo and everyone, because now, of course, mobile technology and phones and these consoles are using similar flash memory and all this stuff, right? But Sony appears to now have a target of $499 to $549, at least according to game developers who have been developing. And I look at that and I say, you know what? I don't really think game developers would be the best source for what's going on in the boardroom and what, I guess, losses Sony believes they can take on a system if they want it to be a certain pricing. A great example was when the Switch came out, developers were actually surprised at that pricing of $300 because they thought it would have been more for what came in the box. So, like, I look at that and I wonder, okay, did game developers who are making games for the Switch think it would have been like $400 at that time? And oh wow, it's $300. That surprises us. And then it comes out that Nintendo is still making some money on the Switch despite the lower price tag than what was expected. So, like, to see this pricing here, that's one that I'm kind of sketchy on and undecided if that is like even a good source for this. they could just be looking at the PlayStation 5 and say, wow, this is a fairly capable machine. I bet you it costs this much, even though they're also working with development kits. Now, according to Bloomberg here, Sony is looking to produce roughly 5 to 6 million PlayStation 5s in its first 2 quarters, and that's going to match up alongside of the 7.5 million that the PlayStation 4 managed to not only have available, but also sell. So I do look at the PS5 as being kind of scarce at launch, and then throughout the next 2 quarters up until probably through 2021, they'll be a little harder to find. Now, the PlayStation 5 is probably being looked at by Sony as like, oh, this could end up being a $500 system, and we don't necessarily want to overproduce the PlayStation 5 because it's costly to us. And if it's not selling like crazy because of that higher price tag, they'll just sit on the shelf. So I'm sure Sony is doing this in this weird balancing act right behind the scenes to figure out how many to even create in the first place. So that's probably a whole thing to figure out. And then you throw in the situation with the virus and the pandemic going on in the world right now, and manufacturing in China being all over the place currently. To figure this all out is gotta be tough. So that brings us to the other part of the article that talks about, believe it or not, the PlayStation 4. Now, it says here, Sony's strategy, according to several people familiar with its plans, will be to rely on incumbent PlayStation 4 models as a bridge to get new users onto the PlayStation platform's network services while the PS5 remains in limited supply. So the idea seemingly is going to be centered around still selling PS4s that could see a price drop. Okay, so the PS4 Pro is $400, the PS4 Slim is what, $300, and they usually come bundled with games. Let's say we drop those down to $200 and $300, and then the PS5 is like $500 or something. You would probably sell quite a few of those PS4 Slim models, even if you had to move the hard drive down to like a 500 gigabyte model. Like, you introduce a new model, it's less hard drive space and all this stuff, but they try to sell it with PlayStation Now as being a big moving point. Like, it's a big reason to own the system if you have PlayStation Now, that maybe it comes with like a part of the subscription, like for a month or two, especially if PS5 games start finding their way on there as streaming games. So like, even if you have a PS4, you can still have some sort of access to a PS5 game if you have PlayStation Now. I mean, if you look here, Sony's chief executive officer, Kenichiro Yoshida, has said the company will aim to increase recurring revenue rather than one-time hardware purchases. They are trying to do what Microsoft is doing with Game Pass. It's just a smart strategy to do it that way, and Sony is looking at that exactly the same as Microsoft is. So maybe we get to a point where PS5 has a game that comes out, it's on the PlayStation Now, their PlayStation Now service day one, and then it's also released into stores through retail, and then of course on the PlayStation Store. That way there is still at least a way or an avenue that PlayStation 4 owners can go if they want to play a PS5 game, but there's no PS5 systems available to them at stores, or it's just too expensive at that time. Now, what's interesting here is they mention the DualSense PlayStation 5 controller reveal. Remember, that just got dropped on the internet. It was like Tuesday, and it was like, here's the PlayStation 5 controller, just randomly next to a blog post. Caught a lot of us off guard. Obviously, it trended online. It blew up everywhere because we're all looking for PS5 information of some kind. But check this out. It says the virus has already upended Sony's promotional plans. The company may forego hosting a public press conference for its PS5 release date and price unveiling due to infection fears. Recently, it was forced to reveal its DualSense PS5 controller in a hurried fashion, according to people informed on the matter. So, it does appear that very limited people have seen the actual PS5 console, but because developers would probably need to see the controller, hold it, check it out, look around it for how they could be using it in their games with the adaptive triggers and where the rumble motors are and everything and how they can get the best effect out of all of that. It makes sense why they would see that controller and use it or even check it out in meetings, but they may not necessarily know what the PS5 console looks like, even if they have a development kit. I still am curious if the dev kit has more of a form factor that the PS5 retail is going to use than we think. But at that time, they could have the controller. As Sony says, they were concerned for leaks because so many people had seen the controller and used it that they weren't sure if it would actually stay quiet up until like a big reveal event. So they just put it out there, it seems. And honestly, it did catch a lot of us off guard when it did get put out there, but like, it's just the controller. The big thing that I think is really gonna, blow up for the PS5 is when they finally show that system, because most likely at that time, it's also time to see some games. That's at least what I'm hoping. We see the PS5 system, we see some games, they do a digital event because they're concerned about doing like a big public press conference. We just need a state of play that's like 30 minutes, goes over the PlayStation 5 system itself. It shows some of the new features they're going to implement for the OS. It shows off the SSD rolling along, and then we get some big game reveals. That's all we really need. Then you can go into like E3 time and do another event where you have more third parties there and you do all kinds of cool stuff. Big blowout for nothing but games, since we'll already know about the console from the previous state of play. But it's certainly going to be interesting over the next few months, because I think by June, we'll know about the PS5 with what it looks like. We'll know about some games. We're not too far off. I think in about a month and a half, maybe a little more, we'll have quite a bit more information about the PlayStation 5, which is exciting, because I think Microsoft's going to start making some moves here again pretty soon, and it seems like they're both going back and forth when it comes to their consoles right now, which, I mean, it's fun for consumers because that means there is competition, which means we're going to get hopefully some good games and good hardware for the price, I'll say, because I do still think these consoles are going to be kind of pricey overall alongside their controllers and everything else. But I'm excited for the next generation. It's just, it seems like the wait just to see the PlayStation 5 it's just been so long. Like, I'm just ready to see this thing at this point. I'm ready to see some games. What's Bluepoint working on, right? Like, we'll see hopefully soon, though, because they're looking to get mass production started in June for the PlayStation 5, give it 5 months, and in November, they should have hopefully enough to at least stock the shelves at retail stores. But go pre-order the PS5 as soon as it's available for pre-order if you wanted to get one. Otherwise, it's going to be nearly impossible, I would say. But thanks, guys, for watching. Make sure you like the video on the way out if you enjoyed it. Dislike it if not. Let me know what you think about the PlayStation 5. Its scarcity seemingly at launch, basically producing less than the PS4 in its same time period, and that pricing. Is it going to be $400, $450, $500, $600? Let me know what you think the pricing is down below as well. Thanks, guys, for watching. I'll see you next time.